When Karen decided my farm was her HOA's private pantry, she had no idea what awaited her. She kept stealing my apples from my garden. Karen thought she could take whatever she wanted. My farm, my crops, my piece-it was all hers for the picking. But she didn't realize that sometimes the sweetest fruit hides the deadliest secrets. I placed a bucket of my finest-looking fruit near the fence she loved to climb. The apples gleamed under the moonlight. Karen spotted the bucket. Her greed took over. She scaled the fence, snatched the fruit, and began eating right there, savoring the taste of what she thought was her victory. She didn't know the fruit had been carefully treated. Hours later, Karen's screams echoed through the neighborhood. Her designer clothes were drenched in sweat, her face pale as she stumbled back to her pristine lawn. The HOA meeting that evening was canceled as Karen was rushed to the hospital, her arrogance finally catching up with her. Drop your city below. We want to see how far this story has reached. Karen was the type of person who made you question humanity itself. She wasn't just smug, she was boldly, outrageously self-righteous, and her cruelty came gift-wrapped in polite smiles and fancy words. My introduction to her reign began not with something subtle, but with outright theft. Imagine this. Karen stood there, bold as brass, picking the ripest heirloom apples from my garden. When I arrived, anger surged through me, but I chose confrontation over chaos. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded, waving toward the dozens of baskets overflowing with my vegetables. Karen didn't even flinch. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she cooed. "We assumed this food was going to waste since you refused to maintain your yard properly. We're helping ourselves to what you clearly don't value." Helping yourselves? By trespassing and stealing? I pointed at the clear, "No trespassing" signs I'd posted everywhere. "This is my property. I've called the police." Karen rolled her eyes as if I'd mentioned unicorns and fairy tales. "Oh, please," she replied, gesturing toward her loyal HOA treasurer, Thomas Jenkins. Thomas, chewing brazenly on one of my purple Cherokee apples, smirked like it was all a game. "We have every right to enforce community standards," Karen continued. "And frankly, your little garden has become an eyesore." "You think stealing my crops is enforcing community standards?" My voice rose, fueled by disbelief and fury. "My property isn't part of your HOA. I've shown you the documents proving it." Karen waved off my protest. "Documents can be changed," she said casually, as if erasing reality was as simple as editing a Word file. "We've already spoken to the county about rezoning this area." Could they really succeed in rezoning? I filmed the entire scene with my phone, ensuring every smug gesture, every moment of theft, was documented for evidence. "This is criminal trespassing and theft," I said, determined to let them know I wasn't backing down. Karen smirked one last time before her group began walking toward the road with their baskets of stolen produce. "You'll be receiving another citation and fine soon," she called over her shoulder, voice dripping with venom. "I suggest you comply quickly before things get worse." That was the moment the police arrived, Officer Martinez stepping out of his vehicle with a mixture of confusion and skepticism etched into his face. The confrontation escalated, with Karen weaving lies and painting her crimes as routine community inspections. But the truth could not be buried under her charm and deceit. My security footage and zoning documents spoke louder than Karen's rehearsed lines. When my attorney Sarah joined the scene, Karen's smugness faltered, but her stubbornness didn't. As baskets of vegetables were reluctantly returned, I knew this was only the beginning. Karen and her HOA cronies weren't going to stop. They were playing the long game, and if I wanted to protect my farm, I needed to fight harder, smarter, and relentlessly. Karen's attack on my livelihood escalated with a boldness that left me speechless. She didn't just trespass this time. She and her HOA crew outright plundered my garden in broad daylight. When I arrived at the scene, they were loading my apples, my lifeblood, into their SUVs like common thieves. My heirloom apples, bell peppers, zucchinis, and even my prized Cherokee purple apples were being hauled off, basket after basket. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" I shouted, storming out of my truck, phone in hand, recording every second of their shameless theft. Karen, ever the queen of audacity, turned to me with a sickly sweet smile. She had one of my juicy Cherokee purple apples in her hand, taking a deliberate bite. Juice dripped down her pristine HOA polo shirt, but she didn't flinch. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said. "We're simply removing the unsightly mess you've let fester here. It's for the good of the community." I pointed angrily to the bright, "No trespassing" signs I'd posted. "This is private property. You are trespassing and stealing. I've already called the police." Karen's icy grin widened, and standing next to her was Thomas Jenkins, the HOA treasurer. He added insult to injury, taking another bite of one of my apples. "Between chews," he said, "these vegetables looked like they were going to waste anyway. The nerve of him biting into my hard work while denying the theft right in front of me. You think this is okay? This is my livelihood, my home. How dare you?" My voice cracked with a mix of anger and disbelief. Karen's expression hardened. "Should have thought about that before you refused to comply with our HOA notices. Maybe next time you'll think twice." The confrontation reached its boiling point. Karen's face twisted into an expression of pure rage. Her desperation broke through as she grabbed Thomas by the arm, retreating to her SUV. "This isn't over," she hissed, voice venomous. "You'll regret making an enemy of me." Police sirens echoed in the distance, and for the first time, Karen's smug demeanor wavered. As Officer Martinez arrived on the scene, Karen was quick to spin the story, claiming this was routine HOA maintenance. I countered her lies with my property documentation, video evidence, and unwavering determination. It wasn't long before my attorney, Sarah, joined me. Her presence shifted the power dynamic entirely. "Officer, we will be pressing charges for trespassing and theft," Sarah announced. The resolution of that day, the HOA crew was forced to return my crops one by one under the watchful eyes of the officer. But Karen didn't leave without delivering her trademark threat. "This isn't over." And for once, I believed her. She wasn't just making idle threats anymore. This was a full-blown war. The day after the confrontation in my garden, I noticed signs of her interference almost immediately. Water flooded parts of the field, destroying newly planted rows of crops. I knew it wasn't just an accident. It had Karen's fingerprints all over it. Determined not to let her antics throw me off course, I spent hours documenting the damage. Photos, videos, every scrap of evidence went into my growing file. I sent another sternly worded letter through my lawyer, demanding that Karen and her HOA cease their harassment immediately. Predictably, the response came in the form of yet another ridiculous notice, this time accusing me of negligent irrigation practices causing flooding hazards for neighboring properties. They even added a fine to the pile. $10,000 for environmental damage. Enough was enough. I reached out to Sarah again, sharing every detail. "She's escalating," Sarah said grimly. "But she's also making herself vulnerable. This level of recklessness is going to backfire sooner than she thinks." The following evening, as I was repairing my irrigation system, an idea struck me. Karen was bold enough to trespass in broad daylight. She'd proven that she wasn't above stealing, lying, or destroying property. If she wanted to treat my farm as her playground, I'd let her, but not without consequences. Near the fence she frequently climbed, I set a trap, not one of anger, but one of strategy. A basket filled with ripe heirloom apples sat right where she would spot it, perfect and inviting. To most people, the sight of such carefully arranged fruit would bring joy, but to Karen, it would be an opportunity for conquest. In the hours before dawn, I adjusted my cameras to capture every angle of the area. My plan was simple: let her greed undo her. The fruit wasn't dangerous, just doctored enough to deliver the bitter lesson Karen needed. When morning came, I didn't even have to watch the cameras to know she'd taken the bait. Karen was too predictable for that. Sure enough, my security footage captured her scaling the fence, snatching the apples, and eating them with gusto before disappearing back into her yard. Karen's fury knew no bounds, and her next move made it painfully clear she was determined to crush me, no matter the cost. It began with a yellow paper taped to my door. My hands trembled as I read the fines listed. $2, $500 for unapproved agricultural use and excessive vegetation. It was absurd. My farm had existed decades before their pristine neighborhood was ever dreamed up. The letter didn't just demand money. It threatened that, unless I tore out my crops and replaced them with HOA-approved residential landscaping within 30 days, the fines would increase. My anger surged, hot and sharp, as I reached for my phone. Only one person could help me now, Sarah Johnson, a brilliant lawyer who had a reputation for dismantling cases of property rights abuse. When Sarah arrived that afternoon, her usual calm was replaced by a simmering anger as she reviewed the HOA's notice. "This is complete nonsense," she said, spreading county maps and property deeds across my kitchen table. "Your land is zoned agricultural and has been for over 50 years. Their claims hold no weight." Her finger tapped a specific paragraph in my property documents. "Here it is. Your farm is legally grandfathered in. They have zero authority over it." Armed with that knowledge, we drafted a cease and desist letter, attaching every piece of evidence we could find: zoning documents, property maps, and legal language that clearly refuted the HOA's demands. Sarah delivered it herself the next morning, confident that the HOA would back down. "Most bullies fold when you stand up to them," she assured me. 3 days later, I found another notice stuck to my door. They doubled down. Fines had jumped to $250 per day, retroactive to their first notice. My total now stood at a staggering $55,000. It was no longer about rules or aesthetics. It was personal. As I paced my fields in frustration, I spotted 2 men in HOA polo shirts strolling through my apple tree. They carried clipboards and acted as though my land was theirs to survey. One of them even plucked a handful of my best strawberries, popping them into his mouth with a smirk. "Just documenting the nuisance," he called over his shoulder, his tone dripping with mockery. That night, I installed 8 security cameras, determined to catch their trespassing on film. But the peace those cameras provided was fleeting. The very next morning, Officer Martinez knocked on my door. "Someone filed a complaint about your security cameras," he said, looking tired. "They claimed invasion of privacy, but as I showed him the footage, he agreed there was no violation." "Watch yourself," he warned quietly. "These folks push boundaries, but document everything. You're going to need it." I woke to find my apples on land. Then I discovered the true horror. Someone had cut my main irrigation pipes in 3 places. Security footage revealed none other than Thomas Jenkins, the HOA, treasurer, sneaking onto my property at 2 a.m. and methodically snipping through my water lines with wire cutters. Enraged, I called Karen. My voice shook as I demanded an explanation. "Your treasurer destroyed my irrigation system last night. I have video evidence. I'm calling the police." Unsurprisingly, Karen's response was as infuriating as ever. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she replied smoothly. "Thomas was investigating reports of a water leak affecting the community. You should be thanking him for identifying the problem." "At 2 a.m., with wire cutters?" I countered, practically yelling. "This isn't investigation. It's vandalism." "If you'd complied with our requests, none of this would have happened," she said dismissively, her tone colder than ever. The damage was severe. Nearly a quarter of my crops were lost to the summer heat before I could repair the pipes. Thousands of dollars in lost produce, and the season was far from over. I spent the day patching pipes, hands raw and blistered from the work. As darkness fell, I sat on my porch, exhausted and broken. Then came the final blow, a certified letter delivered by a grim-faced courier. Inside, the HOA's attorney threatened to place a lien on my property if I didn't pay the $7,800 in accumulated fines. Worse, they promised to pursue forced compliance through court orders if I failed to meet their demands. When I called Sarah, she was furious, but also determined. "They've made a critical mistake," she said. "By threatening legal action, they've opened the door for us. Tomorrow, we're going to the county records office. I'm betting the official HOA boundaries are very different from what they're claiming." After hanging up with Sarah, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the pile of notices, fines, and threats that had consumed my life. Karen had pushed me to the edge, and it was time to push back. But this time, I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to make sure Karen understood the cost of her arrogance. I walked out to my garden. My eyes landed on a bucket of fruit with apples I'd set aside, earlier perfect, vibrant, and irresistible. An idea began to form. Karen had made a habit of sneaking onto my property, taking what wasn't hers. If she wanted my produce so badly, I'd let her have it, but on my terms. Carefully, I selected the ripest fruits, ones that would catch her eye immediately. I treated them with a harmless but unpleasant concoction enough to make her regret her greed without causing lasting harm. It wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about sending a message. My farm wasn't hers to take. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I placed the bucket near the section of the fence Karen always climbed. It was the perfect spot just out of sight from the road, but easily visible to someone who thought they were sneaky. It wasn't hard to predict Karen was as predictable as the seasons. The fruit glistened invitingly, freshly picked and carefully arranged. But there was something else she couldn't see. These weren't just fruits from my garden. They were treated to make sure she would never forget this theft. By dawn, as I tended to the fields, I heard the familiar sound of Karen scaling the fence. She thought she was sneaky, but the cameras told me everything. She spotted the bucket, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the ripe fruit. Without hesitation, she reached in, grabbed a tomato, and bit into it. Then another, and another. She stuffed some in her bag before disappearing into her yard, a triumphant smirk on her face. A few hours later, word spread through the neighborhood. Karen had fallen severely ill. Her screams could be heard down the street as she doubled over on her manicured lawn, sweat pouring down her face. An ambulance arrived, and neighbors whispered from behind their curtains. The queen of the HOA had been dethroned by a bucket of stolen fruit. I stood at the edge of my property, watching as the commotion unfolded. Karen's grand plans for the HOA would be delayed indefinitely. She had finally tasted the consequences of her actions. Quite literally, Karen and Thomas faced their day of reckoning under the sharp gaze of Judge Thompson, the courtroom thick with tension. All eyes were on the big screen as footage of Karen vandalizing my property at 3 a.m. rolled, followed by Thomas cutting irrigation lines, both laughing as they worked. "Mrs. Whitfield, is that you in this video?" Judge Thompson asked, her voice cold and steady. Karen glanced nervously at her lawyer, who gave her a small nod. "Yes, but the context." "The context," the judge interrupted sharply, "appears to be you destroying private property at 3 in the morning. Turning to Thomas, she asked, "Mr. Jenkins, do you deny this video shows you cutting irrigation lines?" Thomas stammered, "We were investigating a water leak." "At 3 in the morning? With wire cutters? While laughing?" the judge pressed, removing her glasses slowly. "I've presided over many HOA disputes, but this crosses into criminal territory." During a recess, whispers filled the hallway. I overheard 2 HOA board members confronting Karen. "You said this would be easy," one hissed. "You never mentioned breaking anything." Back in the courtroom, the tide turned fully against Karen. Testimony from my neighbor, Mrs. Patel, confirmed seeing HOA members carting off baskets of my produce. Officer Martinez verified my property was outside HOA jurisdiction. But the moment that truly sealed Karen's fate came when Sophia called Angela Winters, the HOA's former secretary, to the stand. Looking nervous, Angela revealed the truth. "Mrs. Whitfield specifically targeted this farm after Mr. Jenkins' development proposal was rejected," she said, voice trembling. She said, and I quote, "If we can't buy him out, we'll force him out." Karen's face drained of color, while the courtroom erupted into whispers. Sophia pressed further. "What development proposal?" Angela explained, "Thomas Jenkins' construction company wanted to build condos here. Karen promised board positions to anyone who helped pressure the owner to sell." Judge Thompson banged her gavel repeatedly. "I'll decide what's relevant in my courtroom," she snapped at Karen's lawyer, who feebly objected. "And I find it very relevant that your clients appear to have financial motives far beyond maintaining community aesthetics." "I've seen enough," she declared. "This court finds overwhelmingly in favor of the plaintiff. The Maple Creek HOA has no legal authority over this agriculturally zoned property. Further, the actions taken against the plaintiff constitute harassment, trespassing, vandalism, and theft." Karen slumped in her chair. Thomas stared at the floor. The judge continued, The HOA is ordered to pay $443,500 in damages for destroyed crops, irrigation systems, emotional distress, and legal fees. Additionally, I am issuing a permanent injunction prohibiting any HOA member from entering the plaintiff's property without written permission.